groups. And please help me welcome the Beatles manager, Mr. Brian Epstein. I guess you would have met Monique Van Horn.
I've watched.
And Hank Bradford, Larry Blythe, and Jack Haskell, and so forth. Welcome to tonight. It's a pleasure to have you here and talk to you. How are the ticket sales going?
Well, they're okay. We've sold over 45,000 tickets, which leaves about 7,000 or 8,000. And those can be got tomorrow at Shea Stadium.
That's going to be... Wasn't there a little acoustic problem last time you were here?
Yeah, this might be one of the reasons why we haven't had an immediate sellout this time. I've thought about this as much as and the sound system was not good enough last year, and this year we practiced the sound system that's going into Shea tomorrow for the last two performances in big stadiums, and it's terrific.
Oh, that's good. Well, you override that difficulty, because it's important, after all, to be able to hear them. That's the reason. Although, sometimes, my daughter went to one of these things. She's 17 now. She was 16 then, I think. And it was a very popular group, not as big as the Beatles, but who is. And she said to a girl next to her, because she couldn't hear the music, because it was just shrieking all the time. And she said something to this girl next to her, why didn't she listen? And the girl said, if you came here to listen, to buy the records. So I didn't come here to listen, I came here to shriek. Is that a problem sometimes, or you got to have a sound system that'll override the reaction sometimes?
Well, I know that a lot of people would like to hear the Beatles when they go to these concerts, and that's obvious. A lot of the younger people go, they know the records very well, and I suppose it's the sheer excitement of seeing the boys in person, maybe for the first time, that makes them shout and scream as much as they do. I mean, they only have to hear a few chords at the beginning of the song, and they know what it is. They know what they're singing, and they know how it's going. They can more or less hear it, more or less.
That's right, yeah, because they've got familiarity with the listeners. I thought, this is something that many of you know who saw it, but the Beatles movies, and I apologize for sounding surprised at saying this, that they're very good movies, and the reason I'm surprised is very often when a movie is made around a musical group, the music is good and the soundtrack's good, but it can sometimes be a lousy movie. But these are good movies, and they're funny movies, and I saw Hard Day's Night and Help, and I get a big blast out. Are you going to make any more movies?
Yes, the boys should make one next year. At the beginning of the year, we're working on the script now. It's a good idea.
They must have fun making them, because they are really good. Here's another thing. As you know, if you've been reading the paper, we talked about the controversy. One of the big problems, the more prominent a person or group becomes, the more voltage will be given to any casual utterance that they may make. And sometimes things out of context appear shocking or appear wrong and aren't at all what the person wanted to say. And recently there was a comment that I guess it was John Lennon wasn't made. And what is your explanation of the fact that what he said, as I recall, was that the quote out of context was that he said the Beatles are more popular than Jesus. Now, of course, that created an understandable furor. What did he mean by it? Why did it get picked up that way, and what was it?
Well, in the first place, he said this about 3 or 4 months ago, or even further, I think, in London, in the course of an interview in depth with a reporter from an evening paper who he knew very well, and we've all known, right since the beginning. And it was in the atmosphere of his own home, and this is what he said, and to a certain extent, he meant it. He did not mean to offend or upset anyone, and therefore it was very surprising to all of us, actually, when a few months later it was reproduced in an American teenage magazine as a great big headline. As a matter of fact, when it was first done in London, it was just right in the middle of the article. It wasn't a big headline or anything. And of course this made it seem rather more important and rather more pronounced than he meant it at the time. And since he's been in the States, he said exactly what I said, more or less.
Yes.
And that's what he means.
Well, one account that I read said that he was making a comment on a decline of certain aspects of religion, and the fact that, and possibly even deploring the fact that certain things come to the fore at the expense of things like religion. I don't know whether he's going into that depth, but...
Well, that's the point. He wasn't actually saying that he was deploring the fact that sort of religion was, in fact, going down, or it seemed to him that it was going down here.
But it must be true that anything they say, in a bar or in a or in casual conversation is picked up and taken out of context can be very dangerous.
This is very true, and the difficulty about, well, not the difficulty, I suppose it's the good thing really with the Beatles is that they do in fact say things and mean quite honestly what they say. They never sort of try, well, I never try to influence what they should say. They've always spoken outright and honestly, and this is probably the way that everybody should be, I think. And therefore, I suppose they are pretty vulnerable.
Do they get along well together as a group?
Yes.
They do. I mean, they like each other and they like performing together.
They definitely do.
I understand they're going to do possibly some separate acting a little later on in pictures.
Actually, after this tour, John is going to make a movie for Dick Lester, who produced both of the Beatles films separately from the other boys.
I see.
And but this will only be during a period when they would not have been very active anyway.
It must be, I've read about you and the job you had. At one point, imagine envying a man, or imagine not envying a man whose job was to keep the money from pouring in quite so fast, because that's what happened there at one point, wasn't it? You're trying to spread it out.
Somebody said this, I didn't believe it.
I found it hard to believe it. I'd like to be put to that test.
Yes, could I go back to something for a minute that he spoke about?
Yeah.
Just for a minute.
Sure.
I'm probably going to get a crank letter when I say this, and whoever sends that crank letter is a crank. I don't know that much about the Beatles, but I've seen one of their movies, and my children play their records, so I know what that is, and I've seen them, around like. And they've always seemed like very decent, gracious people to their fans, and in their approach to their work. They've never done a song that was suggestive or in bad taste, ever. And when, was it John Lennon or whoever it was who made that statement, which just turned the world upside down, I was astonished. Because everyone resented him for it, assuming that because he was successful, he had to be arrogant, which I found to be shocking, because he had never done anything to indicate that. And I think that the people who were terribly upset about that comment should look to the truth of it, rather than to blame him for it. I don't think he's inaccurate at all,
No.
In the first place, just numerically, there are fewer Christians in the world than there are Hindus or Muslims, for example, just numerically. But they all are Beatle fans, if you want to look at it that way.
A lot of Beatle fans.
The fact is that this town goes insane. Every place does. There's nobody in the world who doesn't know who the Beatles are. There are a great many people who know who Jesus was, but have forgotten. And I think they had best look to that fact rather than to condemn the man for saying something which is true, and he is not responsible for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Send the mail to him. One little thing, Larry. It'll be hard to refute what you said, except one thing that, and people may already be on their typewriters. It is, you subscribe to a fallacy that I did until recently. Numerically, there are 500 million Christians in the world. I was surprised to find that there are more than there are even Buddhists. I say.
Are there really?
Yeah, your point is
combined?
no, not more than all the others combined. No. But the Christians are not in a minority.
I would like to ask, in what country did it create the most furor, this statement?
Here.
Yeah, here.
The problem started in Birmingham, Alabama, when some disc jockey...
What didn't start in Birmingham?
One other footnote I know, Larry brings up interesting, things. And the thing that, just brief footnote to something that you said there earlier. If there's anything that's taught me a lesson recently regarding the outlook and the dangerous bigotry of isolating a geographic area of the United States and pointing the finger of scorn. It is this recent shameful goings-on in Chicago. The fact that and I get sick of belaboring the South, because the South is not, the South is not to be condemned as being alone in bigotry. It has no monopoly on it, and in some ways the North is worse because it's less honest even about its real feelings. So that I'm not going to belabor the South anymore for any of that kind of thing. Anyway, a lot does start in various places like Birmingham and whatnot, and it did cause a great deal of furor. And I imagine that before these guys' career is over, they're going to casual things that they said will cause other.
Yeah, it did in fact cause a great deal of furor. I wouldn't say that it didn't quite upset the whole world. It did in fact upset the whole press, though. They really latched on to it.
Does this rock the guys? Does it bother them, or are they concerned about
They
it?
were concerned about this. John particularly was concerned about this because he doesn't like offending and upsetting people particularly.
Yeah, their personalities emerged in the movies, I think, the way that you saw how they were. And John seems a little, he seems kind of far out, and some of his humor is way out.
It's beautiful that they write, because I do in my nightclub act a lot of their songs, but not in rock and roll. You can do it as ballad. Just the music alone is beautiful, and the words are beautiful.
Yeah. I think that's the main basis of it. They're musically sound. Without that, nothing else would carry them.
This is the core of the whole thing, because without that, I mean, people have attributed their success to their hair and their wit and everything else, but it all began with music and their songs and their records.